I thought my husband was just overexcited and rambling when he grabbed the microphone at our son's birthday banquet and told me to just relax and enjoy the evening. I had no idea that seconds later, in front of 300 guests and a glittering stage he'd spent weeks obsessively designing, he would point at another woman and declare, "This is my son's real mother," as if I were some temporary babysitter standing in the wrong place. I remember the clatter of cutlery stopping mid-air, the way the hall went from noisy to knife-sharp silent, and how the spotlight he'd demanded for himself slid onto her, while I stood just beyond its edge with my hand inside my clutch, fingertips already wrapped around the tiny remote that would make sure his performance didn't end the way he'd rehearsed. My name is Hannah. I'm 32, and until that night, I had spent 5 years of my life trying to convince myself that my family was unconventional, but still a family. When I married Daniel, I knew he had a son from his first marriage. Liam was 3 then, all big brown eyes, curls, and a serious little frown he wore like armor. His biological mother, Alyssa, had left when he was barely 1, disappearing into her own chaos, addiction, bad boyfriends, a trail of promises she never kept. By the time I appeared, Liam wasn't asking for her anymore. He just clung to Daniel's leg and flinched at raised voices. I met him on a rainy Sunday. Daniel had invited me for a low-key lunch, but the apartment had been a war zone of scattered toys and half-folded laundry. The living room smelled like chicken nuggets, orange juice, and the faint sour trace of milk forgotten somewhere. Liam had peeked at me from behind the couch, clutching a stuffed dinosaur so worn its eye was hanging by a thread. I sat on the floor instead of the couch, my jeans absorbing the damp from a spilled juice stain, and started talking to the dinosaur, not to him. By the end of the afternoon, he was sitting in my lap, his small fingers absently playing with my necklace. The first time he said "Mama," it was an accident. He was half asleep, feverish, head heavy against my chest while I held a cool washcloth to his neck. The room smelled like children's syrup and clean sheets. Daniel was in the kitchen on the phone with his ex-mother-in-law, arguing about something. Liam shifted, his breath hot on my collarbone, and mumbled, "Mama, water." The word lodged in my ribs like a soft, glowing stone. I carried it carefully in silence for days, afraid that if I said it out loud, someone would snatch it away. Daniel heard it next. One evening, Liam ran into the kitchen, his socks sliding on the tile, and tugged my shirt. "Mama, look," he said, shoving a crayon drawing into my hands. A lopsided house, 3 stick figures, a sun with too many rays. My eyes burned. Daniel laughed, ruffled his hair, kissed my cheek. "Guess that's official," he said. "You're really his mom now." I wish I could say that was the version of the story that stuck. But people like Daniel don't like anything official that they don't control. For a while, things were good. We built routines. Morning chaos, school drop-offs, bedtime stories with the same book requested 3 nights in a row. The kitchen smelled like toast and peanut butter and the lemon cleaner I used on the counters. We had inside jokes, little rituals. When Liam had a nightmare, he padded into our room and climbed onto my side of the bed, curling into the curve of my body like it was the most natural place in the world. I was the one who kept track of class projects, doctor appointments, favorite stuffed animals, which sneakers hurt his feet. You know, all the invisible things that make parenting real. Alyssa floated in and out like smoke. Sometimes months went by without a word from her. Then she'd reappear with a flurry of texts. "I've changed. I'm clean now. I want to see my baby." The first time, I encouraged Daniel to let her. "He has a right to know her," I said, even though every cell in my body tensed at the thought. We met in a park on a bright, windy afternoon. She arrived late, in sunglasses too big for her face, smelling like cigarettes and cheap perfume. She hugged Liam too tightly, too long. He pulled away and hid behind my legs. Afterward, she called me Saint Hannah in a half-mocking tone, thanking me for taking care of her boy. There was an edge in her voice, a resentment that slithered into every compliment. "You're so organized," she said once, flicking ash off her cigarette while Liam played on the swings. "I could never be like that. You're more solid. He needs that, I guess." I should have paid more attention to that, I guess. Daniel lived in the middle. To him, I was the steady harbor, the woman who packed lunches and kept calendars synced, the one he vented to on the couch at night, the one who listened to him rehearse his pitches and his grievances. Alyssa was the storm he'd survived, the drama he couldn't quite stop revisiting, the story he told at dinners to make himself look strong and complex. I took care of Liam alone for years, he'd say, glancing at me as if to remind everyone that I'd been a late addition. Then Hannah came along and helped. Helped, as if I'd just reorganized a closet. It was his idea to throw the big party. Liam was turning 8, and Daniel had just landed a major client. "We should make it huge," he said, eyes shining across the dinner table as Liam carefully pulled pepperoni off his pizza slice. "Like, rent a banquet hall, invite everyone. My parents, your parents, the partners, the whole neighborhood. Show him how loved he is." "It's a child's birthday," I said, wiping tomato sauce off Liam's chin. He'd be happy with a backyard barbecue and a cake shaped like a dragon. But Daniel had the bit between his teeth. "You think too small," he said, not unkindly, but in that tone that always made me feel like I was somehow failing an invisible test. "He deserves something big. Besides, the partners love this stuff. It's good optics. Family man. Big heart." I swallowed my discomfort. For Liam's sake, I told myself. For Daniel's career. For our image as the little blended family that could. The hotel ballroom we booked smelled like new carpet, air conditioning, and the faint, sugary undertone of all the weddings and parties that had been held there before. In the weeks leading up to the party, I became the project manager of chaos. I coordinated decorations, cake, catering. I made lists, checked RSVPs, glued tiny paper dragons onto favor bags until my fingers were sticky with dried glue. Our dining table disappeared under color-coded notes and to-do lists. Daniel breezed in and out of the planning the way he breezed in and out of the house lately, dropping ideas, approving things with a wave, rarely staying long enough to do any of the unglamorous work. He was obsessed with one thing, the slideshow. "We have to show his life, you know," he said one night, hunched over his laptop. The blue light made his face look tired and a little haunted. "From baby to now, music, pictures, a whole story. People eat that up. They'll see what we've built." I sat beside him, scrolling through folders of photos I'd meticulously labeled over the years. First day of preschool, Halloween costumes, missing front tooth, other mini milestones that wouldn't have existed if I hadn't thought to pull out my phone and capture them. "Send me everything," he said. "I'll handle the slideshow." I blinked. "Everything, everything?" I was going to make it myself. He shook his head. "You've done enough. Let me do this part. Trust me." So I did. I uploaded gigabytes of our life to a shared folder. Photos, little video clips, the sound file of Liam singing the alphabet off-key when he was 4. I watched the progress bar creep across the screen, feeling oddly exposed, like I'd just handed over my diary. 2 days before the party, I walked past his home office and saw him hunched over the laptop again, headphones on. The door was half open. The room smelled like coffee and his cologne. On the screen, a title slide flashed, Liam's story from the very beginning. I smiled, despite everything. Then, as I turned to leave, I caught a photo that made my stomach twist. A younger Daniel and a very pregnant Alyssa, his hands on her belly, her head tipped back in laughter. I knew that photo. I'd seen it once, years ago, in an old album. I'd asked him then why he kept it. "It's his history," he'd said. "I can't erase that." I'd accepted that. But seeing it at the start of a slideshow he was making now, without mentioning it to me, felt different. It felt pointed. "You're putting Alyssa in it?" I asked later that night. He shrugged, not looking up from his phone. "She's his mother. People should know the whole story." The words landed like a stone thrown into a still pond. I stared at him. "I've been his mother since he was 3, I said carefully. "Since before he remembered who she was. Surely that counts." He sighed as if I were being childish. "You're being insecure," he said. "This isn't about you. It's about him. Stop making everything a competition." I dropped it. Or rather, I swallowed it and pretended it had gone down smoothly. The day of the party arrived in a blur of helium balloons, tablecloth deliveries, and last-minute crises about the magician canceling. The ballroom transformed in a matter of hours. blue and green streamers, dragon centerpieces, a long table groaning under the weight of kid-friendly food. The air filled with the smell of French fries, frosting, and the high-pitched noise of excited children. Adults clustered near the bar, drinks in hand, their laughter a deeper rumble under the shrieks and running footsteps. Liam wore a little button-down shirt and a paper crown he refused to take off. He bounced between groups, flushed and grinning, his eyes wide as he took in the sheer scale of the celebration. Every time he spotted me, he ran over and tugged my hand, dragging me to see something. The candy table, the photo booth. Every time, Daniel was at the center of some adult cluster, telling stories, clapping people on the back, his laugh just a bit too loud. Alyssa arrived 20 minutes late, of course. She swept into the room in a red dress that was a little too tight, hair blown out, lips glossy. Her perfume cut through the smell of food and balloons, sharp, floral, aggressive. Heads turned. Some of Daniel's colleagues stared with open curiosity. She smiled the smile of someone who knows she's being watched. "Hannah," she said, kissing the air near my cheek. Her eyes flicked over my outfit. Simple navy dress, sensible heels, and something like amusement passed through them. "You look sweet." "Thanks for coming," I replied. My voice sounded overly polite to my own ears. Liam stood behind my leg, half hiding. She crouched down, arms open. "Baby," she cooed, "come give Mommy a hug." He hesitated, then stepped forward. The hug was stiff, uncertain. His hands hung at his sides. She squeezed him hard anyway, eyes closed, as if she could will warmth into the embrace. I watched Daniel watching them. His expression was complicated. Pride, nostalgia, something else I couldn't quite name. Maybe guilt, maybe ego, maybe both. As the party wore on, I floated, refilling chip bowls, adjusting centerpieces, wiping spilled juice, reminding kids not to run near the cake table. The things mothers do at parties. Every now and then I'd catch Alyssa at the bar, laughing too loudly at something one of the partners said, leaning in too close. She threw her head back when she laughed, exposing the pale length of her throat, and I saw more than one pair of eyes linger there. I kept my distance. I had learned, over the years, that proximity to her led to conversations where I came away feeling smaller, no matter how they started. When it was time for the speeches and slideshow, as Daniel called it, the DJ turned down the music. The chatter quieted. The hotel staff dimmed the lights. The giant screen at the front of the room flickered to life, the projector humming softly. Liam was pulled to the front, perched on a chair near the stage so everyone could see his face when he watched. Daniel took the microphone. He stood in the spotlight in his tailored suit, tie loose, cheeks flushed with drink and attention. The light made his hair look glossier, his smile whiter. He tapped the mic, waited for the little burst of feedback to die. "Thank you all for being here," he began. His voice filled the room, warm and practiced. "When I look at this crowd, our family, our friends, my colleagues, I feel overwhelmed. In a good way." A soft ripple of laughter. He talked about Liam, about how fast time had flown. He made jokes about sleepless nights, diapers, the mysteries of first-grade homework. People laughed in all the right places. I watched Liam's face, lit by the screen's glow, as he giggled at some of the stories, then glanced back at me, making sure I was there. "And now," Daniel said, turning slightly toward the crowd, "we're going to show you all something special. Liam's life, from the very beginning. The whole story." He nodded at the AV guy. The screen's title slide appeared. Liam, Our Miracle. Soft piano music swelled from the speakers. The first photo was the one I'd seen in his office. Daniel and a pregnant Alyssa, younger, rougher around the edges, but undeniably glowing. Some of the older relatives let out little "aw" sounds. Then came a series of baby photos, red-faced newborn cries, tiny fingers wrapped around adult thumbs, Alyssa in a hospital gown, tired but beaming. Beside me, Liam shifted. He leaned toward me and whispered, "That's when I was really small, right?" "Yeah," I whispered back, throat tight, "really small." The slideshow rolled on. I appeared eventually, but later, somewhere around the 3-year mark. There I was, holding Liam's hand on a playground, kneeling beside him at his first little art show. But the ratio was painfully clear. Alyssa dominated the beginning. I was relegated to later. To the untrained eye, it would look like she had done the heavy lifting, the early years, and I'd merely stepped into an already built life. I forced myself to stay still, to keep my face neutral. This was for him, I told myself, not for me. Kids need to see their whole story, even the messy parts. The slideshow ended with a collage of recent photos: school, vacations, silly faces at the breakfast table. The last image froze on the screen. Liam, gap-toothed and grinning, arms around both Daniel and me. My heart pinched. Applause broke out. People clapped, some dabbed at their eyes. The lights stayed dim. Daniel lifted the mic again, basking. "I think we can all agree," he said, "that this boy is loved." More applause. "And I want to take a moment," he went on, "to acknowledge someone very important, someone without whom none of this would be possible." He turned his head, looking past me. "Alyssa," he said, "stand up." My stomach dropped. She blinked, then rose from her chair near the bar, smoothing her dress. The spotlight followed her, catching the shimmer of her earrings, the gloss on her lips. She tilted her chin slightly, ready. "This," Daniel said, sweeping his free hand toward her, "is my son's real mother." The word real hit me like a slap. "For a long time," he continued, "I've told the story in a way that made me the hero, the single dad, the guy who did it all." He gave a self-deprecating smile. "But the truth is, there's someone else who was there at the very beginning, who gave him life. And she's here tonight, fighting her way back, showing up, doing the work to be in his life again. So let's give her a hand." The applause that followed was messy. Some people clapped enthusiastically, others more hesitantly, a few not at all. I heard a sharp intake of breath somewhere to my right. I saw my mother's face go rigid, my sister's eyes flash. My own body responded in the familiar ways: heart racing, blood roaring in my ears, heat crawling up my neck. My hands felt strangely distant from my arms, tingling. For a second, I thought I might throw up right there on the expensive carpet. "This is my son's real mother," he repeated, a little softer, turning toward the crowd but glancing at me. "And I want everyone to know that." He wanted them to know that. He wanted them to see her, to see him, generous, enlightened, evolved, the man magnanimous enough to give credit to the woman who once abandoned their child, at the cost of erasing the one who stayed. He wanted to rewrite the narrative in public, with witnesses, with applause. What he had miscalculated was timing. I had spent the past 6 months living with a low-grade dread. It started the day I found a series of messages on his tablet, messages between him and Alyssa that were not about Liam at all. They were about what-ifs, about the way things used to be, about maybe fate is giving us a second chance. There were late-night calls that ended with screenshots of her location near his gym. There were photos I had never seen, not of Liam, but of them, now, at a bar, his hand on her waist. When I confronted him, he'd spun the story as only he could. "We're co-parenting," he'd said. "We're trying to heal old wounds. You always said Liam needed both of us. This is me showing up for that." "You don't need to text your co-parent at 1 a.m. that you miss her laugh," I'd replied. He'd rolled his eyes. "You're insecure. You just don't like that I have a history with her. This is about him." Everything was always about him when I caught something sharp. I hadn't told him that I'd started documenting things after that. Not just the messages, but the bank transfer where he loaned her money that had come from our joint account. The night he told me he was staying late at the office, but his location pinged at a hotel near the highway. The way she started appearing more and more often in his stories about healing. I hadn't told him that I'd been the one to ask the hotel if we could plug a USB drive into the AV system just in case we wanted to add a last-minute surprise for the kids, or that I'd loaded a second slideshow onto that drive, one no one had seen but me. Now, in the dim light of the ballroom, while 300 guests processed the spectacle of his real mother speech, my fingers slipped into my clutch. The tiny remote I'd bought online, simple, discreet slide change, the product description had said, lay against my palm, warm from my skin. Daniel was still talking, thanking people, thanking partners, praising Alyssa's growth. She's worked so hard to turn her life around, he said, voice thick with what he thought was gravitas. She deserves recognition. She deserves to be seen. And what about the one who did the actual raising? My sister's voice called out, clear and sharp. Heads turned. Daniel blinked. That's not what this is about, he said quickly. We're here to celebrate. I pressed the button. The screen behind him, which had been displaying the last frame of his slideshow, went black for a second. The room murmured. The AV tech glanced at his equipment, confused. Then the next image appeared. It was not a baby photo. It was a screenshot, a text conversation. On the left, his name. On the right, Alyssa's. The bubble at the top, his. Sometimes I think you're the only one who really knows me. Her reply? We were always meant to be the ones raising him. I hate that she got to do the good years. The room sucked in a collective breath. Daniel froze. Slowly, he turned to look at the screen. His face drained of color. Stop that, he hissed into the mic, his voice distorting. I pressed the button again. Another screenshot. Another late-night exchange. Her. Do you ever think about if I hadn't left? Him. All the time. We were supposed to be a family, not whatever this is now. She's a good placeholder, but it's not the same. The word placeholder glowed on the 20-foot screen like a wound. People shifted in their seats. Someone in the back let out a low, disbelieving whistle. Alyssa's face, lit by the projection, went pale under her makeup. Turn it off, Daniel barked, stepping toward the tech. The microphone squealed. The tech held up his hands. It's coming from a different source, he stammered. Someone else is... I pressed the button again. Now it was a picture. A blurry shot taken from across a small restaurant. Daniel and Alyssa at a corner table, heads bent close together, his hand on her thigh. Another photo. The outside of the hotel near the highway, their check-in confirmation on his email projected in giant letters. Reservation confirmed. King Suite, 2 guests. The same people who had just applauded for his real mother announcement were now staring at the evidence of the story beneath the story. His generosity wasn't about Liam. It was about rehearsing a narrative in which he got to leave me and still be the hero. Hannah, enough, he shouted, turning toward me, his voice carrying without the mic now. The veins in his neck stood out. What are you doing? I stepped forward just enough that people could see me, but not enough to stand fully in the spotlight. What you started, I said calmly. You wanted everyone to know the whole story. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my gums, but my voice stayed level. Years of swallowing my reactions in order not to ruin things had trained me well. Now I was using that control for something else. This is a family party, he said through clenched teeth. There are children here. We'll talk about this at home. I raised the remote slightly, not as a threat, more as a fact. You talked about it on your phone, I replied. You talked about it in hotels. You talked about it everywhere but home. On the screen, another message thread appeared, this time between Daniel and his best friend. It was him bragging. If I play this right, I get it all. My son, Alyssa back, and she can't even say I didn't appreciate what she did. I'll make a big speech. Everyone loves a redemption arc. The phrase redemption arc was the final crack. The room, which had been stunned into silence, began to buzz. People whispered. An aunt gasped, "Oh my God." Someone's drink glass slipped from their hand and shattered softly against the carpet. Alyssa took a step forward, her heels sinking slightly into the plush rug. You weren't supposed to, she started, then trailed off, eyes darting between us and the screen. This is disgusting, my sister muttered loudly enough for the nearest tables to hear. Not her showing up, him planning it like a PR campaign. What do you want? Daniel demanded, his face contorted. To humiliate me? To ruin our son's birthday? You're hysterical. You've always been... Careful, I said quietly. You're on mic. He looked down at the microphone still in his hand, fingers gripping it so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Slowly, he lowered it. I took a breath and turned, not to him, but to the room. I am not here to argue about who gave birth to Liam, I said. My voice sounded strange, amplified by nothing, but carried by the stunned hush. That is a fact. Alyssa did. No one can take that away from her. I have never tried. Alyssa blinked, taken aback. What I am not willing to do, I continued, is stand by while the man who has lived in my home, eaten the food I cook, slept next to me for 5 years, calls me a placeholder, and uses this party to test drive his exit strategy. A murmur of agreement rolled through certain parts of the room, from my family, from some of the women who knew me, from the teacher who had seen me every morning at drop-off with a sleepy Liam in tow. "Liam," I said, turning my attention briefly to the front, where he sat with his knees pulled up to his chest, eyes huge, darting between me and the screen. My throat tightened. "You did nothing wrong. You are loved. By me, by your dad, by more people than you can count. Adults sometimes make really, really bad choices. That's on us, not on you." There it was, the line I would later unpack in therapy, wondering if I'd done the right thing saying anything at all in that moment. But when I saw his shoulders relax by even a fraction, I knew I'd needed him to hear it. I turned back to Daniel. "You wanted to show everyone what kind of father you are," I said. "Now they've seen what kind of husband you are, too. It seemed only fair." I slipped the remote back into my clutch with a soft click, signaling that the show was over. The screen went dark as the tech, sweating, finally cut the feed. "I'm taking Liam home," I added. "You can stay and finish your performance if you like." His mouth opened and closed soundlessly. He looked from the screen to Alyssa to me, calculating, recalculating. For a man who always prided himself on having a plan, he suddenly had none. "You can't just," he started. "I can," I said, "and I am." I walked to the front, my legs trembling, but my steps steady. I kneeled down in front of Liam, close enough to see the individual tear tracks on his cheeks. His crown had slipped sideways. "Hey," I said softly, "how about we have a second birthday party? Just us. Pizza at home. Movie. No speeches." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Can I change out of this shirt?" he whispered. "It's itchy." The normalcy of the request almost undid me. I nodded. "Of course," I said. "Let's go." He slid off the chair and took my hand. His fingers were small and warm, clinging tightly. As we walked up the aisle between the tables, people parted. Some reached out and touched my arm, murmuring things I barely heard. "If you need anything, you don't deserve this. Call me." Others looked down at their plates, embarrassed to be witnesses. I didn't look back. Outside the ballroom, the hotel hallway felt cool and oddly quiet, the carpet muffling our footsteps. The air smelled like cleaning products and distant cooking. Liam sniffled, wiped his nose on his sleeve. "Is Dad mad?" he asked. "He's surprised," I said carefully. Adults don't like being surprised with the truth. He thought about that, his little brow furrowing. "Are you mad?" he asked. "I'm hurt," I said, "and a little proud of myself." He tilted his head. "Why proud?" "Because," I said, squeezing his hand, "when someone tries to tell the world that you're not real, it's important to show them that you are." At home, before we ordered pizza and picked a movie, I went into the bedroom and opened the drawer where I kept important papers. I pulled out a folder I'd started quietly filling weeks ago. Financial documents, screenshots, notes. I added one more thing to it, a printed picture of the banquet program with the words, "This is my son's real mother," underlined in red. Not because I needed the reminder, but because I knew he would try, later, to say he hadn't meant it that way. People like Daniel are good at insisting you misheard. In the months that followed, the party became a story told in hushed tones. "Did you hear what happened at Liam's birthday?" Some painted me as dramatic, others as brave. Daniel tried to spin it as a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by emotions. But the screenshots, the ones everyone had seen, lived in too many phones to disappear. Our marriage didn't survive, of course. You can't undrop a match into a room full of gasoline. The custody arrangements were complicated, painful, full of lawyers and mediators. I didn't fight to erase Alyssa. I fought to make sure my years of actual mothering weren't treated like a footnote. The judge, thankfully, understood the difference between biology and parenting. These days, when people ask me about that night, I think less about the shock and more about the moment I felt the remote in my hand and chose to use it. I could have let his version stand. Alyssa, the real mother, me, the placeholder. him, the noble man, embracing them both. It would have been easier in the short term, cleaner, less messy. Instead, I hit play. He announced, "This is my son's real mother," to 300 guests, expecting applause and sympathy and a smooth runway out of the life we'd built. What he got was the rest of the footage, the part he'd edited out. And what I got, finally, was out from under the role he'd written for me. I'm still Liam's mother. That was never something he got to bestow, and it's not something he can revoke with a speech.